everybody for coming. Especially it's a beautiful June day, finally. And I know everybody could be outside or home mowing. So appreciate you all being here. As Cody said, I came here the first time 29 years ago. And Cody was the first person I met in Mississippi. So it was unimaginable to me then, and probably to anybody I met then. Richard and Lisa, Lynn, Doug, that I would wind up being here 29 years later, living out of town. Anyhow, so thank you all for coming. And Michael, thanks for doing this. Michael and I did it last year, and we sort of enjoyed it quite a bit, I thought.
We did?
It went all right.
Yes, we did enjoy it.
We evolved a little bit. I think last year I called Michael to find out what he was going to wear. So I didn't have to do that this year.
I don't remember that. You did it. I was like, what are you doing, man? Evolution is good. Well, we'll get rolling because we did just do this last year. And I remember having lunch with Chris a couple years ago when he was kind of realizing, I think this might be a series. Like, I think this might be a few books. And I'm like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, because I just kind of turned the next one in. Like, yeah, I think it's going to be a series. But I also kind of, like, it seemed, I don't know if surprising is the right word to use, but it seemed like you would just come upon it without any big plan. It's just kind of the genesis and the evolution of the storytelling, how we came to being the third one of these with, I think, more probably to continue.
I wanted to write a crime novel, and the Hills of Kentucky had, the first one is really the premise is the idea that if there's a shooting at home, most of the people know who did it, and the other people have a pretty good idea of who and why, and nobody tells the police anything. Not because of, for the traditional urban reasons of fearing repercussions for informing the police, but the families are just laying back to give the other family members time to avenge the homicide. So I thought this will be really interesting if I can come up with an idea where there's a murder in the hills, but nobody knows who did it. And that was what started the first one.
Yeah. Well, I think the way you describe that is the way these books feel, and this one too, is that it's modern day, but it feels like it could be set pretty much in any decade in the last, I don't know, however many decades, because there is a lot of secrecy. There's so much, I mean, it's the roots of everything. It is the hills, it's the holler, it's the families. I mean, even though we've got cell phones, that doesn't mean like people are really any different there than they were 50 years ago. And I would say this one felt really kind of more generational, I think, to me, in terms of like stretching between not families, but like grandfathers, fathers, sons, like kind of a lineage of things.
I mean, my only sort of nod or tip of the hat to technology and progress is cell phones and plumbing and blacktop. That's the extent of the progress that I'm willing to acknowledge. Mm-hmm. And most of the people keep their cell phones in a glove box, or they don't have them, but it's just a way for me to sort of say, well, yeah, remind everybody, yep, this is whatever this is, early 21st century. But there is still an old-fashioned way of interacting with people. You go directly to talk to them personally. You don't get on the phone. You don't go through people. And there's a sort of closeness to the land and a respect for history. Oh, that should be in the glove box.
It's not in the glove box.
Well, I think, okay, you go to people directly, right? Mm-hmm. Which also leads to the problems with what happens to our sheriff. So we get a new sheriff, and then we get a new sheriff. But Mick is really good at going to people. And the other books too, but especially in this one, it seemed it's like quite a goose chase. It's always a goose chase, but like, what is it about him, do you think it is? You kind of centered in on this guy, you're following this guy, the things that make him both good at it and also like his hiccups too.
Well, I think that he grew up there. He grew up out in the woods, raised by his grandfather. So there is that generational thing right there. He was raised in an old-fashioned way, deep in the woods. And then he got out and spent 20 years in the Army. So he's a little bit of both worlds. He's seen other parts of America. He's seen parts of Europe and parts of the Middle East, of course, and this. So he's able to, he's an insider-outsider, so he can operate with the people there, but with also the knowledge that there is an outside world, which is beneficial to him. I don't know if that answers the question. But.
Well, I think it brings up something like you and I just talked about, like hanging out and having lunch and this and that and the other, how, and a lot of people here can relate to this, I'm sure, too. You're from a small place and you spend years and years there, but then you leave, and you're gone for perhaps a long time. And when you go back, it's never the same. You do have the ability to like look at things differently, or see things differently, or hear things differently. Mick has been gone. You know, you've been gone from Kentucky a long time. We talk about when you go back out, just the kind of almost feeling a little alien. And a lot of us have had the same experience of leaving Mississippi or leaving wherever and coming back, and things have shifted, not necessarily for them, but for you.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's some of that. Clearly, that seems to help Mick, I think. The kind of the detachment, but also still having kind of the engagement of the history of all that.
I think that's exactly right. That detachment can help, but detachment's necessary in any sort of a murder investigation, and he has that. Cormac McCarthy, I think I can loosely, badly quote him on the day of his death, but I'll try. Sorry to see him go. You know, everyone always says the first Cormac McCarthy book that you read, that will wind up being your favorite. And I've heard that said a few times, and I think it's true. It's true for me, and I think there could be no greater compliment to a writer than whatever you start with, that's going to be your favorite. Anyhow, he said that when you grow up in places like East Tennessee and you go back, all the best things are gone and all the worst things have increased. That's a very loose. He wrote it a lot better than that. But I think there's some truth to that, and it's the place might not change, but the person does, and the person's perceptions of the place does. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the interesting things about Mick too, not just in this novel, but what I've kind of noticed is he always acts like he's leaving. He's always suggesting, and he's always trying to, but then in this one I started wondering, like, he's saying he's leaving. He said that before. We've heard that before, but I never really believed it. You know what I mean? Like, we all know people like this. Doesn't matter what they tell you. You don't really believe it until you see it happen. And I just kind of wonder if you ever thought about that too. Like, for me, like, I didn't really believe in this. Like, I know he says he's leaving again, but doesn't even really want to.
Well, he kind of probably wants to, you know. You'd have to ask him, not me. I mean, I've left.
I am asking.
Yeah, he just wants to move down to Mississippi and mow the grass every week and hope for the rain. He spent 20 years in the military. Was his plan to go back to his home county and open a little shop on a lake, much like Sardis, a man-made reservoir with his wife, and that fell apart completely. His wife left him, and now he doesn't want to open this place with the lake. And then, so where does he go? You know, where does a person go whose future is suddenly stripped away from him? Where do they go? What do they do? And in his case, he has to be loyal to his sister in this book, which I'm not going to talk about for spoilers, that kind of stuff. But I think he still wants to get away. Where do you want him to go?
Well, I mean, if we're going to have another book, he's got to stay, right?
Maybe he can go be a fighter and be in a movie.
Yeah, maybe so. If he's lucky. Apparently never.
I'm sorry to ask.
No, it's a few more months.
Okay.
Yeah. Just physically, yeah. Eventually. You know how that is.
Fall.
Which kind of is, leads me to the next thing I want to ask you, because I've heard this a little bit about the, because most people know about your screenwriting.
Yeah.
abilities and successes there. And this novel, and these novels in particular, like feel really lean to me. I think this one even more so than the other two. And I don't know that it's anything you really think about while you're doing it, but I kind of get the sense that those years of script writing has really like leaned your prose down a little bit.
I don't know, maybe. I don't know if I'm able to be objective enough about my own work that way. These books are the kind of books I like to read. I like to read slim books that move fast. I hate those big wordy guys and ladies. When you read them and you think, really, do we need 3 pages of description? I think about something Elmore and Leonard said, a favorite writer of mine, who said that when you revise, you just cut out the words that most people skim. And I kind of take that to heart, and I want something to move fast. My idea was it would move fast, read like a poem, and move like a rock. So they are a little short, and they are fast moving. And maybe they're a little too dense. I wondered about that. There's material that gets glossed over for the reader. But I forgot what you're asking me about. Oh, the screenwriting. I don't know. The screenwriting, possibly. I mean, I think it improved my dialogue, but I think my dialogue, I was able to write good dialogue, and that translated to screenwriting. But,
I think it certainly can, whether anybody thinks about it or not, this seems way too complicated for me to even balance those things while you're doing one thing, but like, it certainly can't hurt, right? Because of the practice of being really economic and to the point and image driven and to giddy up too, well, kind of, let's get, we got to keep moving. The propulsion of it all.
I think the visual, film and TV is a visual medium, whereas books aren't. You sit there and you read it in your hammock or your chair or your bed, and so the visual part's in your head. So I think if anything, it may have helped me to learn to think better visually, in the hopes that through the process of getting prose on the page, that will then the reader potentially will be able to visualize a scene better. So we can take a vote, or we can go on by.
Those are all good things, clearly. How would you say, I know how I think this one's a little different from the other two. Do you have an answer to that?
I think it's different.
Does it feel a little bit different? I don't know, maybe. I don't know if I want to hear your answer. That makes me nervous. No, it's not, it's a good, it's a decent answer. It's just an observation. Okay. It's not even an answer. But like the title, before I even started reading it, Code of the Hills, that feels like it has more like people are really going to bear down and hunker down and hold on to their secrets and their family faith and the answers and the secrets harder, Because when you start talking about code, that even has the military, from Mick, the military connotation. So it seemed to me like I anticipated people really if you think it was hard to get an answer out of them in the first two, it was really going to be hard in this one, and I thought it really was.
Oh, I see. I didn't think about that. For me, the only thing is that if there's a Code of the Hills, he is trying to live up to the Code of the Hills while being a law enforcement officer, and those two things are in direct opposition. Mm-hmm. So he has to choose one or the other.
Right.
But I think we all have to do that in small ways, no matter what our jobs are. Our personal ethics versus what society thinks is right or wrong, or we should do.
Well, I think that it really adds a human element to it also. Anytime you read, anything, really, but where there's law and order concern, when you see, the actual human being making decisions not based necessarily on the order of law or the crime and punishment, but, internalizing and taking things and having empathy and, really making very hard decisions at their own risk and at their own peril, I think is what is a hallmark of really great any fiction, but crime fiction too. It kind of takes the badge off, takes your uniform away, and you just see the person and the spirit who's being driven by that. And I thought you did that exceptionally well.
Well, think.
in this one, and the other ones too. But yeah, in this one, I felt like Mick was really having to make tough choices, like chapter after chapter.
He does, and eventually, you know, he comes to question some of them. And in book 4, which I printed out just yesterday, some of those decisions he made from some of the decisions he made regarding the code, the unwritten code of the hills, come back and mess with it. You know, like if you follow your own code, you're gonna get in trouble eventually, no matter what it is, right?
That's good. I was thinking that.
Were you?
Yeah, I was like, this is gonna bite him in the ass.
That's exactly the phrase I wasn't going to use.
Yeah. Well, since they are nice folks, maybe they have. Y'all have any questions? Because the third book in, I'm sure you've read a couple of these already, and I mean, I know it just came out today, and some of you may have had a sneak peek. But any questions for Chris concerning the series or the characters or his beard or new glasses? The glasses.
Man, oh man, trying to make the last of my insurance money. I want to. Did you have a question, ma'am?
Well, you were saying you printed out the 4th one yesterday, and I was wondering if you have a sense of how many you'd ultimately like to write, or are you just going to keep writing until you're bored of it?
Yes, I'll keep writing till I'm bored, and you know, I don't really have an idea for the next one, but maybe I'll get one tomorrow. There's another book that's completely separate I'd like to return to and mess around with. I also would like to say thank you all for coming here. I mean, there's people here that I know. Both my sisters are here, which is really nice. One drove down from Kentucky. My former doctor, who I consulted on gunshot wounds, Dr. Githman, is like, wow, okay. I don't want to get into gunshot wounds, but you know, I'm a writer. I'm not a criminal. You gotta get stuff right. I've talked to police officers about this. If there's music, I know some musicians that will be happy to help me. And it's just it's good to see, to have people not at disposal, but to be able to know people who I can consult, and then suddenly there they are. They show up in the middle of the afternoon. So thank you all. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll stop there before I start crying. Yeah.
Is it easier to write about Kentucky when you're away from Kentucky?
It was for me, but when I lived in Kentucky, I started, the last time I lived there, I started writing a novel. There was going to be a precursor to a novel I'd already published called A Good Brother, and I just shifted into nonfiction. So the only answer I can think of it was more interesting, or it's easier for me to write nonfiction when I was there than fiction, because I'm just observing it, really. But since I've left, part of the reason I write about it is I get homesick for the land. There's more variety of fauna and flora than any other part of the United States. There really is. There's more different kinds of trees, flowers, birds than anywhere. And I miss it. And the hills are not that big. They're to human scale. You can climb them, not like the Rockies, you know, Colorado. You can just get up in them and interact with nature, and I miss that tremendously. So part of writing these books allows me to go home in my imagination. But then what happens is the Kentucky of these books and of my imagination is very loosely based on what's really there, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think that probably really helps though with the landscape and all, like not being too close.
Yeah.
To something, because when I'm working on something and somebody will say, like they do to all of us, like, oh, if you whisper it to somebody, they'll say, well, you should read this, or you should watch this, or you should look at that. And that's, to me, it's like, do not watch that, do not read that, do not look at that. Like, because you have something going on in your head, clearly, with these hills that you don't want, like, the too much realism or the reality of it all, I think can mess with it sometimes. And I think you feel kind of the bigness of the wilderness and all, and the hills and all, and this in a very organic way that maybe being back from it does help. You know?
Well, I have a lot of reference books about it too. That helps. I read a lot of reference books about the hills, and I'm very careful if I read fiction while I'm writing new material. I don't do that while I'm writing. When I'm revising, I will allow myself to read fiction set there, because I don't want to get too, like you said, either too second guess and think, oh man, I really messed this up, you know, or accidentally steal, you know, like, ooh, that's a nice line. Let me put that in there.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Michael?
Me?
Yeah.
I have a question. What's your favorite Cormac McCarthy novel?
Suttree.
Suttree. That's the first one I read, but it's not my favorite.
No. Which one do you like?
The Crossing.
The Crossing. That's
Yeah,
an
the part about the
wow.
wolf.
Yeah.
Completely leveled me.
Yeah, I love Suttree because I think it's also funny. It's his
Yeah.
funniest book,
Yeah.
which is saying a lot for that guy. Let's say it's not a funny book;
Yeah.
it has elements of humor.
Yeah.
You're dark.
Anybody else? Do you want to read?
Do you all want me to read?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. All right. I have a little section I thought I would read if necessary. Linda, the sheriff is Linda, and she's the first female sheriff in the county history, and was able to then be reelected in one of the other books against a great fierce patriarchy who was very threatened by a woman with authority, as you can imagine. But here she is. She has to go see this older woman who lives alone and has made a call that there's an intruder in her house. And she gets there, and the woman is just sitting outside smoking a cigarette and around back, and a pretty older lady, and she tells her that the intruder is actually one of 3 ghosts that haunt the mountain behind her house. And she's not sure. She thinks she knows which one it is, based on one's a baby and wouldn't be able to get down to the house from the mountain, you know. And Linda, the sheriff, just is like, okay, what? She's very concerned about it. So, okay, sorry about that. So she first has to figure out just how far around the bend she is. Mrs. Morgan lit another cigarette. Does somebody bring you food and cigarettes? Linda said. My nephew. The one who gave you the gun. The one with your gun. She gave him his. He took the gun so she wouldn't get hurt. Oh yes, he comes by twice a week. Helps pay all my bills too. Runs me to the doctors. Oh boy, the pages aren't turning. Did he gave you that cane in your bedroom? Linda said. Yes, but I don't need it. Did you tell him about the ghost? No, and I ain't about to neither. If I did, he'd throw me in a home. Well, what about moving in with your nephew, man? Nope, he's on the second wife with 5 kids. Thank you, no. Linda nodded, thinking things through. Mrs. Morgan was taking care of the house. Her clothes and hair were clean. She wasn't completely alone, just lonely. Linda leaned forward and looked at the woman, letting her know they were getting down to business. What would you like me to do? Linda said. Oh, what do you mean? Well, you called the sheriff, and here I am. I don't know, Mrs. Morgan said. I got tired of the ghost and figured the law was the one to call. Well, Linda said I could arrest him. You'd have to press charges. But I don't think there will be paperwork, but I don't think it'll go to court. Well, I wouldn't testify if it did, she said. Shoot, my nephew'd have me in the crazy house if I'd ever lived, and I've never lived anywhere but here. How about this, Linda said. I'll take the ghost in custody and give him a talking to. I'll tell him to leave the county or go to jail. Think he'll listen? Well, he won't have a choice, Ms. Morgan. I'm the law. Linda stood and adjusted her belt. She went to the house and climbed the steps to the hall. Mrs. Morgan waited downstairs. Sir, said Linda, loud enough for that Mrs. Morgan to hear. Sir, you need to come with me. She stared at a blank wall for a few seconds, then moved to the top of the steps. She raised her left arm perpendicular to her body and cupped her hand as if holding someone by the upper arm. She descended slowly, speaking aloud. Sir, this is not your home. You need to stay away from this house. If I have to come back again, it'll go a whole lot worse. Don't be coming around here no more. She walked past Mrs. Morgan, whose eyes were intense with concentration. Linda went outside and crossed the front yard to her vehicle. She opened the rear door and pantomimed, helping someone in, placing her head where his head would be to make sure, placing her hand where her head would be to make sure it didn't get bumped. She closed the door and went back to the porch. Mrs. Morgan stood there, her slim arms around her chest. The faded house dress swayed in the breeze below her knees. That'll do it, Linda said. I don't want anything to happen to him. I guarantee you, he will not go to jail. It's not his fault, Ms. Morgan said. He can't help it, I don't reckon. I understand, Linda said. I'm glad you do, because I don't exactly. I just go along with these old deals. That's all any of us can do, Linda said. Then she drives him off. So I thought that you don't get a chance to write a scene where they arrest a ghost that often.
Yeah. Well, I will say for me, it has been awesome talking with you over the years about this and seeing them slowly. Well, not so slowly. You're turning them out pretty good, but talking to you about them and seeing them come to life, it's been pretty cool to watch it. Proud of you and proud of that book and excited for everybody to read it. I mean, y'all are going to dig it. And everybody, I'm sure, is happy you printed out 4 today. Because we'll be back here next year.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be out back here next year, and I will wear the same thing, so you don't have to wonder.
Yeah, I'll wear the same thing too. Yeah. Any other last questions from anybody? Yeah.
Thank y'all.
When you're writing a book, as you said, you're writing the sequels, like the one that you're currently writing, do you ever think about like choices the character makes and how that will turn into the next book, or do you finish it and then start your next book?
No, I never think about the next book. In fact, the idea of it being a series is just pure accident. I wrote the first one during lockdown and finished it. We were still in lockdown, and I'd spent more time with these characters than anybody else, you know, because of quarantine. So I just thought, well, I'll try another one. And then, so my idea was to each ending for these books could be the last, could be an ending for the book, but also an ending for 1 or 2, or in this case, a trilogy. I don't know. So I don't think that way at all. But I do look at them and then use them as sort of source material to write the new one, to make sure that, I don't know, to see what I did before, because I tend to forget what I wrote. Well, I occupy the moment as much as possible, and then you know, I finished this book over a year ago, so I kind of remember the ending. The birds and the ending.